So, I have been meaning to make another video for a while. There are so many things that have come up over the past couple months. Yeah, so I don't know that I have the energy to talk about all of it right now, but I have acquired some things that I was not expecting to acquire, that I did not acquire before my Alabama trip. So, first thing, based on a tip, I reached out to Sequel, who is, they're the people who bought out Three Springs, and so they have the records from Three Springs Paint Rock Valley and Three Springs New Beginnings. And I found it interesting that every single, well, at least most of the email addresses I'm seeing in the whole email exchange with getting records have been a Brighter Path email domain. So clearly the companies, I don't know. Well, I don't know. It could just be that, I don't know, but I reached out on, I googled Sequel, Sequel something or other. Yeah, I googled that and found a web page that just basically had a form for requesting records, and so I filled that out just on a whim. So far, it's been so long that I didn't get any medical records. So far, I've just gotten educational records from Three Springs Paint Rock Valley. I am still waiting for educational records from Three Springs New Beginnings. I knew that when I got my records from Paint Rock that, at least grades would be a load of BS, because I knew at the time that, they were giving me A's for classes, and yet, Paint Rock was the only time in my life that I have ever slept through school, because, they drugged me with medications that made me very drowsy, and I was also being sleep deprived at night, because, they'd say that, they were only required to give us 8 hours to sleep at night at Paint Rock, but in reality, it ended up being less than that, with the end of the night campfire and topics and stuff running late. And then, especially if one of us woke up needing to pee in the middle of the night, all of us had to go to the privy. All of us had to wake up, we had to put on shorts or pants, and our shoes, because we had to lock up our pants and shoes overnight to keep us from running away. We had to line up, walk to the privy, which is a really long distance away, and yes, I did wake up my group. I feel bad about it. I don't know. The problem is we were timed, and that would make me anxious, and so I'd really struggle to empty my bladder. Sorry, this is TMI, and I digress. Yeah, sorry. So, anyway, yeah, so back to education records from Paint Rock. There was one thing I was surprised about. So I was not surprised about them BSing grades. But there are classes listed on there that they totally BS'd. I don't remember taking physical education, psychology, or life skills. And it definitely, even if they counted some things there, like, I don't know. Those grades were actually lower than the A's. Yeah. But what did they, like, how did they finagle that? Because, you know, even though the flyers that they give to parents about Paint Rock Valley said something about individual therapy, that never happened. Never happened. And, you know, I don't think most of the staff members had mental health training. I mean, I know the family service workers did. I found that out. But no, like, I think most of the lower level staff were like fresh college grads with whatever degrees. Like, you know, I don't think most people had mental health stuff. And most of what we did, I'd say, that is not standard mental health. I mean, so it was kind of shocking seeing for grade 11, the year I was at Paint Rock, you know, seeing physical education for semester 1 and 2, it's 81 and 78. I'm not sure. We hiked a lot. Did they somehow finagle that into being physical education? And if so, how did they grade it? Like, I mean, I did the things, I mean, I don't know, like, and then there's, psychology. They did 85 and 80 for the semester 1 and 2, and life skills 81 and 78. I'm not even sure what they BS'd for that. The other thing, there is a second thing that shocked me. So supposedly I took pre-calc. The first semester they BS'd an A. Like, I knew about that. I knew about the A's that they BS'd for English, American history, pre-calc, and chemistry. Because they did some kind of ceremonious, like, whatever, like, I don't know if it was like honor roll or something like that. Giving, like, some kind of BS certificates for, oh, you got an A. And it's like, I slept through the class. Like, I didn't do, like, I hardly did anything. Like, how did you get A's out of that? You know, and like I said, that's the only time in my life I have slept through school. I was not that kind of a student the rest of my pre-K through 12th, well, more like, only had half a year of pre-K. But anyway, yeah, so, like, that was not normal for me. It was unusual circumstances, being trapped in an abusive situation. I would not ordinarily do that. That is not normal. But the weird thing about pre-calc is for the second semester, even though every single other class has a BS grade, they put an incomplete on that one. I'm not sure why. So they just didn't include a BS grade for the second semester of pre-calc. So, I don't know. That was kind of surprising, because I was there. You know, I wasn't transferred to New Beginnings until after my 17th birthday, you know? So, I was there for the beginning of the summer, and, I mean, it was 11 months later that I graduated from high school at Three Springs New Beginnings, so I don't know, like, I don't know how so that was interesting, and we will see if I get education records from New Beginnings. It'll be interesting, since at New Beginnings, I was doing 3rd grade spelling tests and 12th grade English. To their credit, they did bring in a calculus teacher, so I got a little bit of calculus. Yeah, and I tried to take calculus in college, not realizing how far behind I was. We used the same textbook, and oh my gosh, it was a train wreck. I mean, I should have known how far behind I was in school. Usually school stuff came kind of easy to me, you know? But yeah, no. Once I got out of Three Springs New Beginnings, you know, after I turned 18, well, technically yeah, that's a story for another day. Yeah, oh my gosh, college was a train wreck. I got my first F's in my entire life. I mean, some of that was, you know, came out of Three Springs New Beginnings and Three Springs Paint Rock Valley, you know, traumatized. So, you know, I didn't know back then that I had complex PTSD. You know, I came out completely unprepared to deal with the real world. I had to learn how to survive as an adult pretty much on the fly, mostly on my own. I ran away. Yeah, at first I was at my parents' house, and I ran away on campus because it was just toxic at home. But yeah, I was pretty traumatized, and I also didn't know back then that I have autism, and I have the inattentive type of ADHD. That would have been nice to know a long time ago. Yeah, so that probably didn't help. I think some of my struggles in college were autistic burnout. I digress. I wanted to talk about documents I have now. Yes, so task at hand. So I am really lucky in that I have found community with so many groups of other troubled teen industry survivors. It's been super healing, you know, being around other people who get it, who have been through similar things, you know, like, that's how I found out that a lot of other survivors have the same medical conditions that I have. You know, the POTS, mast cell activation syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, you know, like, we're all, well, most of us are sick, you know, with autoimmune stuff as adults. And it's trauma related. It's been interesting finding out that a lot of other survivors had similar issues, you know, in school after getting out. It's been interesting finding out that there are other survivors on the autism spectrum that also had the same side effects from those psych meds, you know, being put on high doses of psych meds in the troubled teen industry. There are others who had seizures like I did, and unfortunately, since I believed the wrong diagnosis for 10 extra years after getting out, and nobody else questioned it until I lived overseas for a bit and actually got real help. Yeah, I had seizures off and on for 10 years, and it makes me mad because, you know, it meant that there were times when I couldn't drive, which, you know, I managed during the longest time when I couldn't drive. But yeah, there are a lot of things that could have been easier, and it was terrifying having seizures, you know, like, I was scared that something really bad was gonna happen, you know, like, if I had a seizure while I was alone. And that was I'm digressing again. Okay, task at hand. Yeah. So, as part of being in contact with multiple communities of other troubled teen industry survivors, and multiple organizations that are working towards helping to shut this stuff down. There was a thing that I was surprised with one day, which was amazing. So, one of my friends from one of the troubled teen communities, she's into researching, and she's just an amazing human anyway. So anytime people find documents from their programs, they send them to her, and she collects them. And so those of us who have been to various programs, if there's been anything collected, we can get access to it. So I didn't know that there were some documents that had been collected from Three Springs Paint Rock Valley and Three Springs New Beginnings. That was super exciting to find out, actually. Because, I mean, oh my gosh, I kind of had a feeling, well, some of it was kind of triggering to read, but it was answers to things that I couldn't get on my trip to Alabama. I didn't get to see any of these kinds of things, so, yeah, because I was hoping, since one of the places I was in as a teen reopened as Pathway, Three Springs New Beginnings, that building is now Pathway. I was hoping that I could get records, that was, and I didn't, back then. I mean, they did tell me, to see sequel, and I just kind of gave up on it. I was like, heck, I'm probably never gonna find anything, I wanted to know, I wanted to understand more about, why the abuse happened, why they did this stuff to us, yeah, so not being able to get records, I kind of felt really gutted about that, to be honest. That's what I wanted. So to randomly one day get a message from one of my friends, that runs a thing, that she had documents. It was basically giving me what I didn't get while I was on the trip. So I have now seen parent flyers, the flyers they gave to parents. Also some of the forms that parents would have filled out, for Three Springs programs. Of course there were all kinds of lies. I knew that the parent flyers would have lies in them, because survivors of other programs who have found documents from their programs have, mentioned on the Troubled Teen Reddit that, a lot of the things listed in the flyers didn't actually happen. So I kind of figured there would be some of that. And yeah, the ones that stuck out to me were, we never went through individual therapy, and it was talking about all these things that, all these therapeutic things that were supposed to happen, and no. And I'm sorry, but some of the school stuff, that was also a no. School was a joke there. No. there was equine therapy, but basically you only got to deal with the horses like for, oh gosh, I think they divided the year into like, I don't know, maybe quarters? I don't remember. And I was only there 9 months, so I didn't get to experience one of the things. I missed drumming there, although I did the drumming at New Beginnings. Oh my gosh, that drum guy was weird. That's another story. Oh yeah, and he was there at both, but anyway. Yeah, no, there were like 4 different things, I think. I don't remember. They may have even divided the year smaller for all I remember. I don't know. I remember there was one part of the year it was ropes course. One part it was, when I first got there, it was the wood shop. Horses was one of the things. But no, it was like a certain section of time. And I remember the horse I was assigned to was Nifty, and Nifty farted. That was kind of funny, actually. But, yeah, no, like, a lot of things in the parent flyer for Paint Rock were so wrong, so far off. And actually, the New Beginnings one wasn't much better. Yeah, so there was that. But the thing that, the document among that stuff that was probably the most helpful thing in there was, well, I've printed it out because I want to show my counselor this and talk to her about it, but, I have a copy of the resident handbook, and the revision date is halfway through my time there. They did not hand these out, at least not to the people who had been there for a while, at least during my time there. I left in June of 2003. And the revision date is January 10, 2003. They started to implement some of this during my time there, but most of it was implemented after I left. So some of the things I noticed are, in the beginning of it, there are Dear Resident letters, or Dear New Resident. And the first one, I think that is someone who was there a long time ago. And they mentioned, you know, I was a resident here for 10 months. You know, it kind of makes me mad that they put this in here, because I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that just like at Paint Rock, the majority of the people who graduated from there, I'm pretty sure they were there for more than that, you know, like, I know at Paint Rock, a lot of the people who graduated, it was like somewhere between 18 to 24 months that they were there. I mean, there was one girl that graduated in less than a year, but, I mean, she had been at an even worse program before Paint Rock, and I think she was already broken down, or I don't know. I also suspect that the group she was in was less abusive, because the only person from Paint Rock that I've ever heard of actually healing from the trauma and doing well, like truly doing well, was in that same group. So I think the majority of the people, you know, it was the longer time, and I was pretty sure that New Beginnings was the same way. And the reason why I think this is that one of the girls that graduated during my time there was in my Paint Rock group. before I got to Paint Rock, but was transferred to New Beginnings before I got to Paint Rock. Yeah, and I met her when I got to New Beginnings. And actually, she's the second letter. I'm pretty sure. I mean, the initials on the second letter are JB, and the writing sounds pretty much the way she would talk. So I think it's her. Unfortunately, she is not with us anymore. She is one of the ones that unalived herself, which I sobbed when I found out, because, you know, I could actually be friends with my peers at New Beginnings, and she was my first friend, and she was undiagnosed autistic as well, and she was also one of the ones that got bullied the worst at Paint Rock, just like me, and just like another girl, and, you know, I blame both places for her death, but I especially blame Paint Rock. But yeah, anyway, but based on knowing how long I was at Paint Rock and kind of having a good guesstimate of how long before I got to Paint Rock that JB would have been there, and, you know, kind of having a guess of, you know, when she got transferred to New Beginnings. The fastest the graduation could have been was, I'd estimate, about 15 months. And that's on the fast side of it. I mean, but yeah, it was not a, you know, graduating from there was not a quick thing. I don't think most people got out of New Beginnings in less than a year either, just like at Paint Rock. I think it was closer to a year and a half or 2 years. I could be wrong, you know. I was only at Paint Rock 9 months, and I was at New Beginnings 12 months before I aged out. So I could be very wrong, you know. But yeah, so that's why, you know, if I'm right about the lengths of time that people were there when I was there, if they graduated, it makes me mad that they put in a really, really, really old resident, like from the beginning of when that place was open. You know, it's like giving false hope, you know, like, you're not gonna get out of there that fast unless you age out, if you're lucky enough to be close enough to 18. Yeah, it was hard seeing the thing that I'm pretty sure is the JB I knew in there. She graduated, I'm pretty sure, like sometime before Christmas. So it would have been right before this revision came out. In this, there was also, so one of the changes that happened sometime after Christmas, you know, around the time they started rolling this out, is that, you know, when I first got there, gaining levels, it was a little more straightforward. I mean, the nice thing about New Beginnings versus Paint Rock is that, you know, at New Beginnings, whether you gained or lost levels, the staff had more control over that than peers, whereas at Paint Rock, it was kind of, the majority of that decision went to your peers. So if, you know, it was kind of like a popularity contest, and if you didn't fit in, if you were neurodivergent, no, if you were being bullied mercilessly, you were not advancing levels. You were just not, you know. Although it's, even at New Beginnings, I mean, there were times, you know, right before a girl would graduate, just like at Paint Rock. Paint Rock did the same thing. But yeah, at New Beginnings too, if a girl was like this close to graduating right before the last level, staff would randomly stage suspension girls, like, and so they'd be stuck there an extra week or two, and then they'd get the last level and graduate. So it wasn't completely straightforward at New Beginnings, but it was, when I first got there, pretty much you were actually handed something like this, and so you could see what you had to do to gain levels, and I appreciated that because there was not that, it wasn't as straightforward at Paint Rock, and I wasn't even told the rules when I first got to Paint Rock. I had to learn the rules by breaking them, which of course felt horrible, getting in trouble over and over. So I appreciated getting a list of rules when I first got there. Well, and plus being friends with my peers meant that I could actually ask questions and not accidentally end up on non-com for talking to another, first level, whatever, like at Paint Rock, accidentally without, yeah, anyway. But halfway through my time at Paint Rock, when they started rolling this out, basically they added a bunch of mini stages within each level. In this, it's called Privileges to be Earned. The thing that makes me mad is they claimed that adding the mini levels within levels was, they said that was, I guess, scientifically proven to be better for programs for girls to do it that way. And I can tell you now as an adult, there are no such studies. They lied. It's just making it harder to advance levels, so people were stuck in the program longer and they earn more money. Yeah, they lied. So yeah, there's that. There was another thing. So there was a list under each level. There was a list of the belongings that you were allowed to have. My gosh, trying to find one of those pages. Okay, level 2, community low. Okay, in room. Yeah, so on the second level, this is not the first level, oh, come on, I'm gonna have to read it from the first level, if I can find it. Okay, so they tell you the belongings you can have when you first arrived at New Beginnings. 10 outfits, 2 pairs of shoes, 1 bedding set, 2 stuffed animals, 5 pictures of immediate family displayed, 1 religious text, 2 personal books, and handbook. That is what you were allowed to have. So there is a thing that happened sometime after Christmas. It would have been sometime in the spring. I was off campus when it happened. I was not there. But basically all of our, we were allowed to have more things before Christmas. Yeah, sometime after Christmas, basically they took away our personal coloring books, crayons, and markers. We weren't allowed to have certain writing utensils that could be harmful, or I don't know. Yeah, they took that stuff away, which was really frustrating because I got either markers or crayons for Christmas, and some residents who weren't there anymore gave me their coloring books when they, left. But yeah, supposedly these things were in the office, or the staff office, and we could ask for them, but basically everything, even if it was something you personally owned, it became community property. You couldn't have it anymore. And basically they claimed that they did this because a girl in my group tried to unalive herself with a hair tie. First off, this girl was not small enough. She was small, but she was not small enough to use a ponytail holder to unalive herself via, I don't know, like, I don't know. But it makes me mad that, you know, when I came back on campus and found, you know, and was told about this, you know, the fact that this was presented as a punishment, when in reality, what it was really doing was reducing belongings to basically what this would allow, the new revision of this, you know, and they couldn't be truthful about that. And that's another thing that makes me mad about my experience at Three Springs New Beginnings, because yeah, it's like there were times where it was like they were looking for somebody to mess up or whatever just so they could group punish or, like, you know, make a rule change, whatever, that, I don't know. And honestly, that thing happening with the coloring books and markers and crayons and stuff, that was the first thing I thought about when I saw the news articles about Pathway in Owens Crossroads. You know, it's the same building. Yeah, you know, when they said that the so-called riot happened because the girls had nothing to do in the evenings, that was the first thing I thought about, because yeah, if you're not allowed to have a lot of belongings, you know, it's pretty prison-like, you know. But yeah, yeah. I know the staff member that recognized me at Pathway that I talked to, you know, that was there when it was Three Springs New Beginnings and remembered, you know, how it was when I was there. I know she says that the girls are safe and that, you know, the program's different. I hope she's right, but I don't know. You know, there's still questions that I haven't been brave enough to ask. I do know that they have a different level system than we had, so that's at least something I know. But I still haven't been brave enough to ask if, I mean, the biggest question I would have that I hope to eventually get brave enough to ask her is, if the girls have uncensored access to being able to communicate with anyone they want outside of the program. You know, because most TTI programs don't have that. And that's one of the reasons why programs can get away with abuse, is because girls have and boys, you know, kids basically have no way of telling anyone when there's abuse going on. And that's a problem, and that's how it was when I was there. Even though my parents were abusive to me when I was growing up, they were the only people I could talk to when I was at Paint Rock and New Beginnings. I could write them letters, which were censored, and I had timed phone calls. It was a certain length of time, and if you mentioned anything about abuse, immediately got hung up, and you'd get in trouble. And they also told parents that, you know, if your kid said anything about abuse, that they were manipulating to get out, which also made it harder to get help. And of course, local law enforcement are complicit, so if you actually manage to run away from either of those places, they just send you back. You had, like, no help. You really did. You know, and local doctors wouldn't question anything if you had injuries that were consistent with abuse and happened to see a doctor outside of your program. You know, one of my friends, who was one of the girls in my group at Paint Rock, and yes, I've forgiven my peers. I'm back in touch with a couple from there. One of them was sexually abused by a psychiatrist at Paint Rock, and at one point she was bleeding badly enough she had to go to the ER. They literally dressed her in new clothes, you know, or clean clothes, and, you know, before they took her to the ER. And the doctors, you know, all the staff at the ER didn't question anything. Which, you know, they're supposed to report stuff, especially if it's something that could be a sign of abuse. And they don't, you know, and it's sickening. It is just sickening, you know. And to be honest, I don't have a lot of confidence in any of the, I mean, I could be wrong. I admit, it's been 20 years since I was there. But considering how Alabama, you know, politicians don't shut places down. They just let things run endlessly, and then they reopen, you know, under a new company, whatever, which, I don't know. It could be the same people, you know, because that's a tactic the troubled teen industry uses. I don't know much about the company that's running Pathway. I know I Googled them, and they look like a fairly new company, which is suspect. And there's not a lot about them. I can't help but wonder if that's that troubled teen industry tactic of, you get shut down for abuse, create a new company, you know, basically have the same people, and voila, reopen and abuse more kids, you know. Yeah, I don't know much about the company. There's not much about it, and it looks new. Oh, I've got a friend. Hello, Elsa. So yeah, so I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about that place being open. I don't know. I want to believe that staff member who told me the girls are okay. But I also, in the back of my mind, you know, is she, at this point, if she's worked, you know, in multiple iterations of this company, does she think that this is normal? Because, I mean, that's what I wonder about, you know, because my first family service worker at New Beginnings, I found out recently as an adult that she has complex PTSD just like I do. And I know that as an adult, there have been times where I have been blind to how abusive a situation was because of, you know, growing up in an abusive environment, and then, you know, being in 2 different troubled teen programs where basically we were brainwashed into believing that what we were going through was treatment, that we were bad people, and that everything bad that happened to us, you know, we deserved it. And, you know, like, when you're in that for 2 years pretty much, or almost 2 years, you know, you grow to think that that abuse is normal. And I can't help but wonder if that's why, even though my first family service worker at New Beginnings recognized abusive dynamics outside of New Beginnings, you know, and all that, and she actually protected me from my parents for the first time in my life, I I don't think she recognized the abuse that was happening within the building, if that makes sense. And she worked for Paint Rock on the boys' side before and after her time at New Beginnings, as far as I know. And the boys' side, you know, if we thought the girls' side was bad, and it was abusive, the boys' side was even more horrifically abusive. And how do you not see that? But it makes, I get it now, like, that I think it's related to complex PTSD. But I also wonder, you know, especially since the staff who run programs like that, you know, like Paint Rock and New Beginnings, they are very charismatic, and I can't help but wonder if they convince some of the long-term staff that this stuff is normal, even though it's absolutely not. It's only normal for abusive places, but it is not. That is not good care. Like, no. So, I don't know. I don't know if there's that dynamic, you know, going on with that staff member that told me that the girls in there are safe now. It kind of bothers me that Pathway showed up in the news again. Somebody else ran away. You know, I still pray for those girls, because I don't know. I know what I went through in that building. I know what I went through at Paint Rock and New Beginnings. I know how bad it was. I know how much it messed me up. I mean, it messed me up educationally. I should not have been doing 3rd grade spelling tests and 12th grade English, playing educational games like Zoombinis on the computer. Like, those, it's like for, like, I don't know, they seemed like elementary school level games, maybe like middle school at highest, and I was doing this in 12th grade. Like, what the heck? You know, and getting mostly A's for sleeping through school at Paint Rock, you know. So I don't know, like, I question, you know, could I have finished a college degree had I not lost 2 years of high school in those two places, you know? And then there's the physical abuse and the emotional abuse, you know, and just looking at how that's destroyed my physical health and mental health. You know, complex PTSD is no joke. And yeah, I mean, being trapped in a bad place like those with no help and no way out, no way to tell anybody you're being abused and you wouldn't be believed anyway, you know, all that, it messes you up for life. And then, you know, just not being able to recognize the signs of abuse because of, you know, being basically convinced that the abuse that you experienced at, you know, in the troubled teen programs was not abuse. So if another adult treats you the same way as an adult, you don't recognize it as abuse. You think that's normal. And so, you know, a lot of survivors end up in very bad relationships over and over and over. You know, and also if you're traumatized to the point where you're not able to work more than part-time, you know, you're screwed financially. It makes it hard to keep a roof over your head. Yeah, I mean, and I was trying to get on another kind of disability that pays more, but there was exactly one job I had that I was full-time for 9 months, and it's looking like having that job for 9 months means that I'm stuck living off of 900 something a month for the rest of my life. 'Cause yeah, I mean, I'm hoping eventually to get to a point where I can get well enough to work part-time again. I want to. I miss having that people interaction. But just the number of survivors that are disabled now because of what we went through in the troubled teen industry, and also the number of survivors who were dumped in there by parents who are now disabled, who are now relying on their parents to keep a roof over their head because disability doesn't pay enough to survive and you can't get into subsidized housing anywhere. I mean, I'm in that boat, you know? Like, I'm dealing with that, and it's not okay because, you know, I want to forgive my parents, and I'm working towards that. But relying on them financially puts me in a vulnerable situation. And I don't want to be in this situation long term. I am working on, you know, figuring out a way out, but yeah, it's hard, you know? You don't see it in the videos, you know, but a common symptom among a lot of the medical stuff I've got going on is fatigue. I can only function for a few short hours a day, and in that time I have to survive, you know, showering, eating, caring for my cats, you know, stuff like that. And I have to get to a point where I have more hours that I can function before I can work part-time. And that's, you know, I'm doing what I can. I'm doing brain retraining things, doing a lot of somatic therapy on my own, since, of course, insurance won't cover anyone who does that, because, you know, Medicare and Medicaid doesn't pay as much and requires a ton of paperwork, so no one wants to take it. I'm doing a lot of polyvagal theory stuff on my own. I've been, oh my gosh, I did a ton of PT leading up to the Paint Rock and New Beginnings trip in May, because I wanted to be able to walk, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to be in a wheelchair because of the terrain. I wasn't able to walk as much as I wanted to, which sucked, but I did better than I thought I was, because leading up to it I was like, oh crap, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still working on, you know, trying to improve. It's just, I don't know. I want to believe that there's hope for being able to do more, but I can't guarantee it. And also, I mean, I have the vascular type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which has a life expectancy of 48. I know people sometimes live longer, you know, but I've already had very bad things happen with surgeries. I've had a lot of bad stuff happen already, you know. 80%, I think it's 80% of people with the vascular type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome have a critical event by age 40. And I've definitely had, yeah, I've had some definite life-threatening things happen already because of it, and I don't know how long I have, you know, so especially since I'm 40 now, you know, I don't know if I'm gonna live long enough to have time to improve my functioning enough to work. And then, you know, mast cell activation syndrome. I do have anaphylaxis episodes, and that's another thing that I'm lucky that here I see an allergist that finally got the frequent anaphylaxis episodes somewhat under control. So I don't have them as often, but I do still have a lot of issues. And yeah, I don't know. So I'm doing what I can, as long as I'm on this side of the dirt, and I'm trying to enjoy life as much as I can while I'm on this side of the dirt. And honestly, telling my story about, what happened to me at Paint Rock and New Beginnings is important to me, because if my life is gonna be short, I want to make sure that before I die, I do something that makes a difference. And you know what? If telling my story can help shut down other abusive troubled teen programs, if telling my story can prevent at least a few parents from sending their kids into those horrible abusive programs, if telling my story convinces Medicaid to stop covering abusive troubled teen programs for foster kids, if telling my story means that individual education plans, or whatever IEP stands for, if telling my story helps stop the flow of some, special ed students from schools being routed into the TTI as their special education thing, I feel like that would be making a difference. Because the troubled teen industry is basically legalized child abuse. I don't know of any programs that I could say for 100% certain are good. Every single one that I know enough about to make an educated decision about it, every single one is abusive, and they all need to be shut down, or at least regulated. If any of this stuff is going to exist, there needs to be better regulation. And kids need to be able to talk to whoever they want outside of the program with nobody monitoring what they say. Because otherwise, kids can't get help if there's abuse. And there needs to be awareness about what goes on in programs like this. That's the other reason why I'm telling my story. Because if there's awareness, there will be outrage, and hopefully, people who have not been affected by this finally standing up and saying, this is wrong, we need to shut this down or regulate it, So, yeah, that's why I'm telling my story. And there are more things I want to say, but this video is getting long, and I'm tired, so I want to lay down. But yeah, there will be more, I will say, on another day. Yeah.